Scotty, how do you see the situation in Lebanon? Who is acting in good faith? Who is being genuine? And who is being deceptive?
You know, Hezbollah got involved in the conflict 5 days after the conflict began. So, and the Israelis are treating the conflict with Hezbollah as a completely separate conflict, an ongoing conflict. Israel mobilized troops. They have a separate Lebanon policy. Right now they're trying to implement, to advance deep into southern Lebanon, then to annex the totality of that territory into Israel. This is part of their, national security strategy, so to speak. And so to suddenly have Lebanon linked to the, comprehensive peace agreement that the United States is seeking with Iran, that was disconcerting, politically impossible for the Israelis to accept up front. And so political games had to be played. Netanyahu rejected that. Trump then, the U.S. pretended that Trump had thrown away these 10 points, and Vance had to go out and say this was a mistake on the part of the Iranians. And this could have been done under the misguided belief that Iran would say, "Oh gosh, you're right. We don't." We don't insist on this, but the Iranians, stood their ground and says the Pakistanis came out very strongly, condemning the Pakistani Minister of Defense, condemned the Israelis in very harsh language. The Pakistani president called the United States liars and said without any shadow of doubt that this was an agreement. And ultimately, the United States, my understanding is that Israel has in fact acknowledged that the ceasefire will extend to Lebanon, because that is the only political dynamic that can exist. This is going to require Israel to, have to eat things it doesn't want to eat. But they have no choice in this matter. Israel started this war. Israel is the one that on February 11th briefed the president on the ease in which this war could be won through regime change, suppression of missiles. The head of Mossad was there giving the president intelligence briefings that were different from what he was getting from his own American advisors. The president went with the Israeli information. And so Netanyahu doesn't have too many cards that he's holding as president right now. He's been embarrassed, disgraced, and the president had to buy him some political room. And that's what happened. There had to be a time for the Israelis to adjust to this new reality. But now, at the insistence of the United States, Israel acknowledges that this ceasefire extends to Lebanon.
Scotty, what exactly did the United States achieve during those 6 weeks of bombing?
This is going to drive people insane. We didn't lose this war from a military standpoint. Because we never fully engaged in this war. This was an air war. But the United States has escalation potential, but it's politically unviable. And so long as we remember that this is all about November, this whole war was about November. This war was a gambit on the part of Trump and his cabal of peace through strength aficionados to, this was going to be the 1, 2, 3 punch. Venezuela, Maduro's head, Iran, Khamenei's head. Then we meet with Xi Jinping and we throw those two heads on the table and we say, now, when we talk about the Pacific, you have to take us seriously. And the Chinese were supposed to quake and quell and surrender. We got the Venezuela part down, but Iran failed. Xi Jinping, we pulled out of the talks because we no longer had, the foundation to talk with China. And in the meantime, the entire world's changed. I mean, I call this an empire terminating event. You talked about the Japanese sending tankers down. You know that there was a tripartite framework agreement between Japan, South Korea, and the United States confronting North Korea and posturing to contain Russia and contain China. Where we talked about nuclear submarines and we talked about nuclear warfighting, sharing plans, et cetera. All premised on the notion that America was going to be there to back everybody up. Well, the missile defense shield that we had put over South Korea, THAAD, Patriot 3, didn't work. And then we got rid of it. We broke it down, sent it off to Israel to replace the one that didn't work the first time around. The South Koreans and the Japanese right now, this tripartite framework agreement's finished. The United States can guarantee nothing. Japan understands how fragile and vulnerable they are economically, because if the United States can't guarantee the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, what about the Straits of Malacca down in Indonesia? What about the South China Sea, where China has those islands? Japan just woke up to the fact that the United States isn't there to, if they continue to ally themselves, they're not going to get stronger, they're going to get weaker. Look at AUKUS, Australia, United Kingdom, U.S., another big, Pacific-oriented relationship. First of all, the UK's out. Starmer said, I'm done with America. So it's now AUS. And the Australians, they're done. They have the same problem as the Japanese, that the United States can guarantee nothing. We don't care about Australia. If we cared, we would have consulted. We didn't consult. And now they're going through an energy crisis. This is the NATO. NATO is just about finished. I mean, we're talking, the president and DeMarco Rubio were talking about pulling out 100,000 troops. And we're talking about being selective in terms of whom we support. That's the end of, collective defense. All of our strategic relationships that defined who and what we were geopolitically for the past 40 years, they're gone. They're finished. They're done, especially in the Gulf Arab states. It's over. So this is a huge strategic defeat for the United States. It goes beyond simply, what's going on with Iran. But the Iran picture, because everything I just said, the American people don't understand, Judge. I'm just sorry to say that they don't. I just finished talking to somebody who was like, this is the end of Trump. He's going to lose the November election. I said, dude, if you think you can call an American election in November, in April, you know nothing about American politics. American politics is where the American people are in September, and the American people aren't driven by what's going on around the world. They're driven by their pocketbook. It's the economy, stupid. That's the lesson Bill Clinton gave us. And this president has time to turn things around and put on a con game to get things where he wants them, but not if we're bogged down in a forever war in the Middle East. He has to get out of this war.
Scotty, to what extent was Israel hit, and what position does Netanyahu find himself in now?
But to be frank, I don't know exactly how battered they are, because there's been effective censorship. But enough information has gotten out that the implication is they've been hit harder than they've ever been hit before. In that this was becoming a political problem for Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israelis always said going in that they can absorb a finite amount of damage, and they're willing to raise that parameter up as much as is politically viable, if and only if, and this is the important part, if and only if the guaranteed outcome is the end of the regime and no more missiles and no more nuclear program. They're not going to get any of those. And so now Netanyahu pushed for this war. He's the one who went and sold this war to President Trump.
Right.
He's the one who put the reputation of Israel on the line. And everything he said turned out to be a lie, to be false, be overhyped. As General Kane said, the Israelis tend to oversell everything, and we should be very careful with what they're saying. But Trump wasn't careful, and we went to war on behalf of Israel, for Israel, using Israeli intelligence. And now we failed. Israel's not going to get anything it wanted. There will be no regime change. The regime is stronger today. The missiles, they're there. Iran's not giving them up. And, the nuclear program, Iran will strike a compromise deal that allows enrichment, and that's politically untenable. So, Netanyahu is in a lot of trouble. I think tomorrow his criminal trial begins. And the thinking that the United States is going to fly cover for this guy after he got us involved in this war. I think we're looking, it's hard. You got to be careful when you talk about the demise of Benjamin Netanyahu, because he's been such a political survivor for so long. But right. I've always said that the only way after October 7th, 2023, he stays in power is to continue to escalate conflict. That the only thing he has to sell the Israeli people is that he's the security guy. He's the national security guy, that there will be no security without him. Well, he just failed in the final test. The regimes of Iran's there. And remember, this is the war he's been pushing for a long time. He's been saying, we can't take Iran out without the help of the United States. Well, we went in all in. I mean, we put all the chips down there. We said, let's go. And we lost. We didn't get it. So Netanyahu's in a lot of trouble, a whole bunch of trouble.
Scotty, how could they have failed to anticipate the closure of the Strait of Hormuz? And why didn't they prepare for that scenario?
Well, first of all, the military has planned for it. I mean, we have the Fifth Fleet right there, whose job is to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. I know for a fact that the Fifth Fleet in the 1990s believed that they could keep the Strait of Hormuz open. They believed that we had sufficient power to do that. But that was before Iran transitioned into, the military posture that it enjoys today. Its area denial munitions, its missiles, this changes the entire dynamic. Our Navy is not capable of forcing the Strait of Hormuz. We would lose our fleet. And this is something that has been apparent for more than a decade now. And known, the Navy knows this. I mean, there's a lot of political blustering. You always see an admiral, we guarantee within X amount of time, if the Iranians try to shut it, we'll have it back open. But anybody who studies it will say, no, you don't. No, you can't. No, you won't. So this was a known. But again, the president, deals with, it's not that we couldn't, I don't think the issue of forcing the Strait of Hormuz came up because the scenario the Israelis played out was regime change will create the conditions in which we won't have to discuss the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
Just like we won't have to discuss Iran's ability to sustain ballistic missile launches. If we change the regime, all of these other issues become moot. And so from Donald Trump's perspective, having embraced the Israeli posture, you didn't have to worry about the Strait of Hormuz because we were going to topple this regime. That's where he says that, he was taken by surprise. We didn't think the Iranians would be able to do it. Not that they, weren't planning on doing it. They couldn't do it. He just didn't believe that the regime would last long enough to be able to pull it off.
Scotty, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Again, if as long as we keep this, war is an extension of politics by other means. That's as straight up Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, and anybody else who ever studied war. And as long as we keep this political paradigm in place where it, as Larry said, it's all about November 7th, then Iran holds all the cards. But the Iranians have to be careful here because the president can't make all the compromises that Iran wants. Iran will have to give something back. And I know, they're winning and they've won and all that, but Iran, it's the same thing, the same dynamic we've seen with Russia, Ukraine and NATO. Everybody's out there saying, Russia sets a red line, it gets crossed, Russia looks weak, Russia, the NATO's expanding. There's only one winner in this conflict right now, and it's Russia. And the reason why Russia is winning is that Russia kept the political dynamic the way it always was. Russia never changed the political dynamic. They managed escalation. And as a result, they weren't bogged down. They didn't change the political dynamic. And now they're dominating, the world on all fronts when it comes to energy and geopolitics, et cetera, because they kept it the same. The Iranians need to keep their eye on the ball. Right now, they're winning because of the political dynamic. But the moment you turn this into a situation where, Trump no longer is focused on November, if you make it so that November is an impossibility no matter what, then the political dynamic changes. There are things that the United States can't do right now militarily because to escalate would harm the political reality of November. You take November away, mobilization's on the table. That now you turn this into an existential struggle where the president can sell it as such to the American people. Then we no longer have a cap on escalation, and we can escalate through. And this is where the Iranians have to be very, very careful. Israel has an absolute red line that Iran cannot have a pathway to a nuclear bomb. Which means that Iran is going to have to accept limitations on its nuclear program that probably mirror that agreement which was made before the United States and Israel began to bomb. Now, there are people out there saying Iran will never go back to that agreement because they were bombed. No, Iran will go back to that agreement because that's its only chance. Because if Iran insists on having an agreement like the JCPOA or better, that gives them a path to a nuclear bomb because it means unrestricted enrichment. That won't happen. So the Iranians are in the driver's seat right now, but they can still screw this up if they overplay their hand.
if we're talking about one of the aircraft carriers deployed in the region, positioned far from Iran's coastline, what kind of influence can it actually exert there, especially when operating alongside destroyers?
Yeah, no, they don't have that many, but the destroyers really aren't, like with respect to the Abraham Lincoln, those destroyers are there to provide air defense, not to go out and start attacking. They're not going to, they can threaten to shoot missiles at a tanker. But, doing that would both escalate this beyond what it is right now. I don't, the United States just doesn't have enough ships. If the Iranians could adopt a variety of tactics, so if it's an Iranian flagged vessel or part of their what they call their ghost fleet, I could conceive of a situation where you send 4 out together in a convoy, and then if they get a U.S. ship tries to stop them, they just split up, and the U.S. is not going to have enough assets to cover all 4, as an example. And if those 4 come equipped with guys on board, the IRGC on board with man-pads, man-portable air defense systems, that any helicopter approaching the ship would be shot down. I mean, there's a variety of ways this could go. So we'll see. But it doesn't appear. If they're just trying to block what's out of the Strait of Hormuz, that's one thing. But Chabahar, it's over there further to the east. They can ship out of there. So, this is not well thought out, and they didn't. They don't have the assets in place. U.S. Navy does not have the assets in place yet to really enforce an effective blockade.
They've got speedboats. Far fewer than drones, though, and those drones can support the boats in that kind of operation. If things escalate, they could turn to missiles. But overall, there's still a lot of uncertainty about how any real confrontation would actually play out.
Trump keeps insisting we've destroyed their Navy. Okay. Then, why can't you get through the Strait of Hormuz? Well, because Iran can still has the capacity to lay mines and still has drones and missiles that can be fired at any ship. And how do you stop that? You ultimately would have to land troops and go inland about 200 to 300 miles. Well, the U.S. doesn't have enough force to do that. It's not going to do that. It would be a staggering error. The number of U.S. troops that would likely be killed on the Iranian shores would be in the tens of thousands if they tried to do that. Yeah, Trump's just making it up as he goes along, and unfortunately, he is suffering genuinely dementia. He has no filter, says whatever's on his mind. I mean, he's picked a fight now with Pope Leo. That's crazy. That's going to rally the Catholics around him. So it's just, Trump needs to be removed from office. Because he's no longer thinking rationally, and he's entirely under the control of Israel.
Honestly, it seems like the people around him, whatever you want to call them, advisors, maybe even something like spiritual figures, are reinforcing the idea that he has some kind of messianic role, as if he's here to save everyone, especially the United States and Israel. But in reality, it feels like his actions are more aligned with Israel than actually benefiting the US. And when I say Antichrist, I don't mean it in a literal biblical sense, as some prophesied evil figure, but rather as a symbolic way of describing how far this perception has gone.
He is genuinely the Antichrist. And by that, I'm not suggesting he's the evil being foretold in biblical prophecy. I'm just saying he's the exact opposite of Jesus. Where Jesus brought healing, Donald Trump brings sickness, disease, death, destruction. And yet, when he put out that image yesterday of him like as this angel healing somebody, with his hand on their forehead. Oh my God, it'd be one thing if he's doing it as a joke, but he really believes this stuff. And that once you get somebody with those kinds of grandeur, beliefs about themselves, you recognize it's time to, pull the plug. He needs to be put into a nice white coat, tie his hands behind his back, lead him off to a sanatorium. Well, they're supposed to give him $1 billion each for his board of peace. He's expecting that $450 million airplane from Qatar. They're supposed to line up and wipe his ass or kiss it. He claimed that Mohammed bin Salman was kissing his ass. I'm sure MBS went, oh, that's out of line. No, look, these the two countries that are at greatest risk right now of ceasing to exist are Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. UAE is a particularly fragile society, and I would not be surprised to see its government collapse and it ultimately be returned to the control of Oman. I think even if Donald Trump doesn't understand it, the admirals and generals in Indo-PACOM, I presume it's an admiral that's in charge out there now, they recognize there's too much risk of this escalating, getting out of control, and they understand as well. Right now, the United States is not equipped at all to get into a fight with China. Our weapon systems are exhausted already, and Indo-PACOM, they probably have the last remaining PAC-3 missiles in the entire U.S. inventory, and they probably have less than 1,000. Which, you say, well, that sounds like a lot, except that 1,000 means they can only try to counter 500 missiles if China fires 500 missiles. Well, China's going to fire 5,000 missiles. So, Indo-PACOM recognizes this is getting into a confrontation with China right now would be the very last thing the U.S. should do. Yeah, they're just... it's like those advocating, all we're going to do is take Karg Island. That'll cripple the Iranian oil industry. Okay, again, step back and say, well, what is the purpose with your policy? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to increase the volume of oil that's available on the international market? Or are you trying to reduce the volume? Well, if you reduce the volume, that's going to drive the price up, and that's going to be a big inflationary jolt to the global economy, including the United States. So maybe you want to do the opposite. How do we increase the flow of oil? Well, you don't do that by blockading the Strait of Hormuz. Because, you say, well, we're just targeting Iran. Well, right now, Iran's the only one in that Gulf that's able to produce and ship oil. This is a policy that's just it's a dumpster fire. Well, it's going to hurt Europe economically, and that's the thing they've got to be really concerned about. And I was reading one headline with respect to the oil and gas market that it says that the UK airlines only have weeks of jet fuel reserves, and once those run out, they're going to cut flights, and at the same time they're going to be raising the price on flights that are still able to fly. So you're getting a double whammy there. You're getting less economic activity and higher costs. Well, yeah, J.D. Vance got put in the position of becoming the scapegoat, and he didn't really have the power to negotiate. He was there as a mouthpiece, having to check back with, Trump and Rubio and God knows who else, just to say, can I do this? Can I not do this? As opposed to going in with a clear understanding of what what are we willing to accept and what are we not willing to accept? It shouldn't be complicated. But the U.S. made it overly complicated. And I think Iran entered those negotiations fully expecting it to fail, but they still wanted to leave, at least demonstrate to China and their other allies that, hey, we're trying to find a peaceful way out. We'd prefer that. But, the Americans get a vote on this too, and they're voting no. You got to have clear positions. So what is Trump's position on the Strait of Hormuz? Should it be open or should it be blocked? And his answer is yes. You're going, what? So you want it open and you want it blocked? Yes. Does it matter to the United States or does it not matter to the United States? Yes. So you're saying it matters and it doesn't matter? Yes. So, how do you negotiate with that when somebody is literally from one spectrum to the other? You don't. Which is, another reason why this thing ended the way it did.
The ceasefire isn't holding, yet there's talk of extending it while Trump opposes it, creating uncertainty. At the same time, the US blockade on Iranian ports may also target China, since most oil goes there. The key questions are how effective this blockade is and how long it can last.
It's hard to say because the blockade has only just begun. I think it'll take a couple more days to figure out what's happening. I think that it's going to make the global economic crisis worse, and it's going to turn more countries against the United States because, for example, as you rightly point out, the Chinese are very angry. The Americans are basically dictating terms to China and saying that you cannot have oil and that you cannot do trade and that you're not allowed to enter this part of the world. And we've already seen that happen in Venezuela, and now it's clear that the Americans want to strangle the Chinese through controlling the means of energy. But it's a double-edged sword because simultaneously he's intensifying the global economic crisis. And for U.S. allies who are much more vulnerable than China, this is going to be catastrophic, and the catastrophe is going to happen earlier, sooner, quicker, because now nothing, or at least the plan is to have nothing leave the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians have also, by the way, as I'm sure you know, said that they will, if this blockade continues, they'll start striking ships in the Red Sea, and they'll block the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman. That will make things even worse because the Saudis are now exporting, I guess, roughly 4 million barrels a day from the Red Sea. And of course, trade goes through the Red Sea. But in addition to that, as the Iranians escalate and as the world goes towards ISIS, the Iranians don't have a shortage of money right now because the Iranians have been putting aside a lot of money during the last few years, especially in gold. But also the Iranians have made a lot of money during the past few months, ever since the United States began increasing its presence in the region and then during the war. Iran has been selling its oil at a much higher price, without middlemen, without discounts. And Iran also had 200 million barrels of oil on the seas. And it sold about half of it now. And it still has another 100 million barrels, which it will probably sell within a few weeks. And that's a huge amount of money. That's itself, I guess, 2 months of Iranian exports of oil. So, but it does indicate how little oil is left on the market. Extra oil is all disappearing. Russian oil on the seas was not as much as Iran, but they also had oil in tankers on the sea. They've finished all of that. They've sold theirs. Iran has sold half of its oil. So, this just shows how bad the situation is going to be shortly with regards to all energy-related items and helium and energy-related commodities, and this is when the factories run out of helium and run out of LNG, and when agriculture faces a crisis because of a shortage of fertilizer and all that, I think then we're going to see dramatic change. At the moment, from what I'm hearing from people who understand politics far better than I, is that this is the tip of the iceberg, and that we're moving very swiftly to a turning point where things will go downhill very fast. And Trump is intensifying the speed towards which we are moving in that direction.
This could trigger a global economic crisis, especially as fertilizer shortages drive up food prices and fuel further instability. But beyond economics, the key question is whether the US is willing and able to escalate into a high-intensity war with Iran, given the blockade, military build-up, and potential risks.
Well, the Iranians are expecting a major assault, and they are preparing day and night. And they, too, like the Americans and the Israelis, are rearming and reorganizing and preparing defenses and preparing offensive capabilities. So Iran does not, doesn't see the negotiations as necessarily serious at all. And then most probably the Americans are buying time. The Iranians are naive. As I said before, before the 12-day war, many thought Iran was caught off guard. Iran wasn't caught off guard. Iran had to negotiate for the sake of its own, so that its own people, first and foremost, would see that we tried. Because if we did not negotiate and the U.S. would assault, Western media, like the Washington Post, which is right now calling for the assassination of negotiators, they would be the first to say, well, if the Iranians had negotiated, we wouldn't be where we are. They're never going to blame the aggressor. They're going to blame the victim. And then a part of global public opinion would be affected, but most importantly, Iranian public opinion, part of it would be affected. If we want to make sure everyone is on board. And that was true about the 40-day war, the Ramadan war. And that's true now. So the Iranians are going to definitely continue engaging with negotiators, but Iran's not naive. And as we saw, when the Israeli regime began hammering Lebanon, Iran cut off, it stopped its side of the bargain and said, well, nothing is going to leave the Strait. What we promised to do to increase the number of ships going through the Strait of Hormuz, that stops. So ultimately, by violating the ceasefire, the United States is hurting itself more than it's hurting Iran. The Israeli regime is hurting the global economy more than it's hurting Iran or Hezbollah. And by doing that, the Israeli regime is being viewed across the world as the reason for global misery and the rising hardship that we're seeing across the world. So after 2.5 years of genocide and now genocide in Lebanon, they're going to be blamed across the world. So Iran wants to make sure that it is seen as trying to solve the problem and that people see that it is Netanyahu and Zionism that is pushing the world towards economic catastrophe. So Iran is preparing itself for war. But every day that goes by where we have a ceasefire, this is putting more pressure on Trump because the global economic crisis is approaching. Now, we don't believe that Trump will disobey Zionists. The Zionists, they're the ones in charge. They're in control. And so is Netanyahu through the Zionists. The only way in which we can bring about change is to put so much pressure on Trump, economic pressure, that he is forced, or the U.S. government is forced, or some Zionists in the United States are forced to prioritize America over Israel. In other words, to make it so painful that they say, no, we cannot continue listening to Netanyahu. The cost has gone the cost is too high. But still, we believe that there will be a war. We believe that there will be a land invasion. There will be a massive attack on Iran, a massive act of aggression, and there will be propaganda talking, and from Trump's opponents and supporters, all of them will say how great, successful it was. They've captured here, they've captured there. Perhaps a couple of ships will, quietly or quickly pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and they'll announce some sort of victory. But it's not going to work. The Iranians are prepared. They're preparing further, and they will strike back. They'll destroy the facilities in the Persian Gulf, the oil and gas infrastructure, and everything else that's necessary on the other side of the Persian Gulf, and in a bigger way than last time around. As we saw during the last day of the war, Iran hit very, very hard. But there's also another element here, Glenn, and that is that we're approaching we're leaving. This is the end of spring. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, and when it attacked Iraqi forces in Kuwait, those were carried out well before mid-April. And they were during the cool weather. In the next 4 weeks or so, the weather goes up very much. Then we enter that hot season. So you'll have sandstorms in the Arabian Peninsula, you'll have great humidity, and it will be very hot. Fighting under those conditions is very difficult. I have experience of that because during Saddam's war against Iran, I did fight in the south in the summer, and you can barely do anything during the day. It's very difficult. So I think that American troops will not be able to perform well and under such difficult circumstances. And the damage done to American hardware, military hardware, will increase because of the humidity, the heat, and the sandstorms. I just don't see any opportunity. And, the Iranians, just as they prepared themselves for over 20 years, for well over 2 decades, and we've discussed this together for years. Everyone can go back. All the things that have happened, we've predicted before the war. Just as Iran prepared itself, and it has a huge missile and drone capacity, and when the war starts, you'll see Iran hammering them day after day after day again, 24 hours a day, both the Israelis and the Americans and the proxies in the region. But they've also prepared themselves for an American invasion. They haven't just prepared themselves for an American airstrike or an American air attack. They prepared themselves for a land invasion. So do the Americans really think that they'll just walk in and do what they want? They've already failed in their operation to steal Iran's enriched uranium. They will definitely fail on the battlefield. So the weather is no longer appropriate. It's sort of like winter in Ukraine, if not worse. The summer in the Arabian Peninsula is. And then imagine if there is war, then if they started striking Iranian targets or Iranian infrastructure, and we start targeting infrastructure on the other side of the Persian Gulf, if we strike their electricity in this weather, in the weather that we're going to have in the weeks ahead, everyone will have to leave. The Persian Gulf, these Arab regimes, the weather there is good for, let's say, 6 months a year, and terrible for 6 months, or good for 7 months, 6 months, something like that, and terrible for 5-6 months a year. So if Iran strikes their electricity, then everyone will have to leave, not over like a week. Everyone will have to leave immediately. all of these regimes will immediately collapse, especially since they're, the elites in these countries are so well off that they cannot tolerate any form of hardship. Whereas in Iran, if they strike our electrical power plants, I mean, Tehran in the middle of summer, it would be warm. We'd be uncomfortable, but it's not there's no comparison. Right now, as you know, there's snow on the mountains to the north of Tehran. A lot of snow. Last night when I was out, I had to wear a jacket. And with my jacket, a light jacket, I was so cold. In central Tehran, not in the north where it's more mountainous. So it would be both very difficult for American soldiers, and if the two sides are striking one another, it would be the end of Kuwait, the Emirates, Qatar, and so on.
Israel says it's ready to resume war if talks fail, yet Iran seems focused on the US rather than Israel. So how do you assess Israel's position, especially with internal political divisions and possible leadership changes?
Well, let's begin by acknowledging that Netanyahu, who put Trump up to this war, Trump, of course, was predisposed to go to this war. He's been anti-Iranian for many decades. He also does not appear to understand diplomacy as an alternative to warfare. In that regard, he's like Netanyahu. But Netanyahu is very frustrated with Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants to end this war. Netanyahu does not. Why does Netanyahu not want to end the war? Well, charitably, one reason is that Israel has not accomplished its objectives. It has not achieved regime change or state collapse in Iran. And it has not achieved the defeat of Hezbollah, despite having decimated Hezbollah's leadership echelon. So there are sound strategic reasons for Netanyahu to be opposed to ending this war, and therefore to be at odds with Donald Trump. So Donald Trump acts unilaterally. Israel is not directly present in the Islamabad meeting. Of course, it's indirectly present through Witkoff and Kushner, who are both devoted Zionists and very close to Netanyahu and his government. But Israel is not directly present there. It has no direct voice. Similarly, Israel had a kind of phony ceasefire imposed on it in Lebanon, which of course it's gradually unraveled because it never accepted it. So Netanyahu does not like Trump's unilateralism, and Trump doesn't like Netanyahu's unilateralism. That said, Israeli politics are always very personalized and very chaotic, and always a great battle. And very few people in Israel like Netanyahu. His final motivation for continuing this war is that as a wartime leader, he can continue in office and stay out of jail, where he otherwise will end up due to crimes of corruption. So I think we have the odd situation. The Israeli public appears to support the war still, so that you get the opponents of Netanyahu, Naftali Bennett and Lapid, posturing for that reason, supporting the war, but against Netanyahu. Netanyahu doesn't want to give up on the war because if he does, he's in trouble. And the Israeli public doesn't like Netanyahu, but they can't change wartime leaders in the middle of the war, apparently. So this is a very awkward situation, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. There are elections coming up, I believe, in October in Israel, and That may clarify things, although Israeli elections have a way of not clarifying anything, just complicating it. So we'll see.
With polls showing strong public support in Israel for returning to war, even against Iran. Do you think Israeli society fully understands its military limitations, or is it disconnected from the reality on the ground?
I don't think there is much information. Now, the military censorship is very effective. Therefore, people may know something about whatever happened locally, but they don't have the whole picture in Israel. Israel is a society that venerates its military. It's very militarized. And while the military itself is in great trouble, as the chief of staff has pointed out, it's fatigued, it's overstretched. It relies on reservists who are increasingly reluctant to report for duty. Still, Israel has a kind of hubris. You know, it has a habit of, quote, winning wars, unquote. Even when it doesn't win wars, it proclaims success, rather like Donald Trump. So we see, you know, retreats from Lebanon are covered by statements about how much was accomplished and so forth and so on. So it's very unrealistic. And I think the other factor is Israel is internationally isolated, and it is now a pariah. And you would think, I mean, Israel says that it is the Jewish state and that it represents all Jews everywhere. Jews should all go to Israel and become Israelis. But the fact is that what Israel has done has caused great danger for Jews everywhere outside Israel. It has revived anti-Semitism at a level which would have seemed impossible before this recent 4-year sequence of events. It has, we're seeing, you know, in lone wolf incidents, apparently, like this stabbing in London of a couple of British Jews, and we're seeing synagogues attacked and so forth. And this is not anything that was happening before. But I think, frankly, Israelis don't give a fig about Jews outside Israel, despite their claim to be the representative of Judaism, of world Jewry. They don't really care. In fact, there is a long history of Israeli efforts actually to promote anti-Semitism because it causes Jews abroad to want to go to the safe haven of Israel. Well, Israel is no safe haven now. And Jews outside Israel, in increasing majorities, are disgusted with Israel. They don't want anything to do with it. So Israel is doing grave damage to its image, to its standing in the world. It's also doing grave damage to Jews outside Israel, and it's depriving itself of the political and military support, potentially, that it requires for its survival. You know, there's talk now about a new restructuring the American military supply relationship with Israel to end the congressional involvement in it, privatize it, basically, turn, you know, and persuade American defense companies to produce in Israel or jointly with Israel, so that political support for Israel is not necessary to continue the military support. This is what is going on. I mean, that is not a stupid maneuver on the part of the supporters of Israel, but it is an indication of how much damage Israel has been doing to its own survival. And we come back to the point that for the United States, this war with Iran is a war of choice. It's not existential. The United States is not going to disappear. We may suffer some pain, but we're not going to disappear however this war turns out. But for Iran and Israel, it is existential. I mean, Israel has made it existential for itself. Iran has made it existential for Iran because Iran does not want to return to a situation, will not agree to return to a situation in which it is subject to renewed attack by Israel, backed by the United States. The only way this war can end, from the point of view of Iran, is, as Iran has said most recently, in a three-phase process. First phase, there's the general agreement on peace in West Asia, and there are guarantees, credible guarantees, against further attack on Iran by Israel and the United States. That if that can be achieved, then Iran is prepared to sit down with Oman present, evidently, to talk about the future rules for using the Strait of Hormuz. But it won't do that until there's been a general peace agreement. If the Hormuz issue can be resolved satisfactorily from Iran's point of view, then it is prepared to talk about the nuclear program, but only then. And here I want to make an important point. The last time any Iranian leader said Iran does not want and will not build nuclear weapons was February 11th. Since February 28th, there has been no reiteration of the pledge not to build a nuclear weapon. Why? Because the people in Iran who want to build a nuclear weapon, who feel that a nuclear weapon is essential for Iran's deterrence of further attacks by the United States and Israel, are now in charge. And so, of course, you're not hearing this. And a lot of the discussion that we're seeing internationally, zero enrichment, the IAEA talking about resuming control of Iranian enrichment programs, moving enriched uranium to Russia, as was under the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action of 2015, this was done. This is all extremely unrealistic because there's a lot of evidence now that if Iran hasn't actively decided to build a bomb, it intends to do that. It has the motivation to do that. It has the United States and Israel have deprived the opponents of a nuclear Iran of their arguments. So now Iran, inspired by North Korea, is, I think, going to produce a nuclear weapon, and the means of delivering that, probably not just to Israel, but also to the United States. So, which is what North Korea has done. So I'm waiting to be refuted by an Iranian government statement repeating the fatwa, which, by the way, had an escape clause in it. It said that if Iran's existence, the Islamic Republic's existence, was threatened, that the ban on building weapons of mass destruction would be lifted. I think it has been lifted. What exactly is being done underground in Iran, I do not know. But I take very seriously the comments of our friend Ted Postal, who says that Iran is entirely capable of fabricating nuclear weapons in a matter of weeks, not months. Maybe it has already done so, as he suggests may be the case. We don't know. But I think the focus on the nuclear program by the United States and the international community is a false focus. I don't think, from the Israeli point of view, the Iranian nuclear program was the reason for this attack. I think the reason was the Greater Israel Project, the obstacle that Iran represented to that, Iran's status as an enemy of Zionism, and a desire to shatter the Iranian state one way or another. The nuclear issue was an excuse, in my view.
Larry, with US war cost estimates jumping from $25 billion to $50 billion, what does this say about the scale and trajectory of the conflict?
Well, you look at the the rescue effort for the downed backseater on that F-15, a special weapons officer or systems weapons officer, whatever they call it. We lost $500 million of planes on just that one day. Two of the radars that Iran took out in the early days of this war were over $1 billion apiece right there. Reportedly, more than 49 aircraft have been shot or lost during this engagement. So, that probably those aircraft total probably about $2-3 billion, right? So yeah, the numbers keep piling up. But what the hell do we care? It's a credit card, and we don't have to pay the interest on it, or so we tell ourselves. This is like giving your kid goes to college, they get a credit card, and they never have to pay the bill. So you look at the acceleration of the debt. When Donald Trump took office, the debt was at $37 trillion. By the end of December, it had gone up $1 trillion. And then in the next 77 days into 2026, it went up an additional trillion. So it's now 39 trillion. And if that trend line continues, I think by the end of May, end of June at the latest, we'll be up another $1 trillion. And so we'll be at 40. And so this is economically unsustainable. And so this is it's the economic side of this that's going to bring an end to U.S. military operations. The full weight of that has not hit yet. It's starting to hit, though, around the world, and it's creeping here into the United States. Just as the Trump administration opened up the strategic oil reserve and was pumping oil out to try to keep the oil prices down, gasoline prices down. That's now failed. So just in the last 3 days, the price of gas here, at least in Florida, it's gone up 40 cents. So it's going up about 10 to 20 cents a day.
Larry, Europe initially backed the war, but now seems divided. How do you interpret this shift, and what does it say about U.S. strategy and its impact on Iranian public opinion?
Well, the United States we failed to learn any lessons from history, for starters. The thing I've become sort of obsessed with this week has been a reaction to Trump's claim that the Iranian leadership is in disarray, that there's nobody in charge. And this is not something that Trump came up with on his own. This is, I believe, Israeli intelligence that's been transmitted via liaison channels, and the majority in the Trump cabinet have bought onto this. They say, "Oh yeah, that's true," because when I started looking at it in depth, Pezeshkian, Arachi, Galibaf, the Ayatollah himself, Mujtaba Khamenei, and then the head of the IRGC. It turns out all five were IRGC in the Iraq War. Now, Pezeshkian was he was regular army, but he was a medic. And they assigned him to work exclusively with the IRGC. So he was treating and saving the lives of IRGC folks. My point in all of this is that all of these guys who are in leadership positions, they come out of the same background. They didn't serve in necessarily the same exact unit, but they all fought. And four of them are combat veterans. And, we ought to put that into the context of remembering our greatest generation that were combat veterans, how they interacted with each other. It wasn't one of great division. And so this tells me that right now, Iran actually has probably the strongest, most unified set of leaders that it's had in its history. And we better damn well take that into account, because the notion that they're weak, the notion that they're confused or frightened. I mean, these guys have been to war. Donald Bone Spurs Trump has not, okay? He found ways to avoid service. Hegseth is the only one in the group that has actually had some military experience, and obviously he didn't learn much from it. So the United States is grossly underestimated the nature of the Iranian leadership, and then the effect that the U.S. attack has had on the Iranian people. Instead of, I think John Kiriakou commented the other day, he was watching one of the videos, and there was Iranians in the street waving flags in favor. It was a protest in support of the government, or not a we got to find another word for it. It wasn't a protest; it was a rally. And the camera focused on this one. Let's call her a lady. If she would have been a poster girl for a lesbian gathering, she was very butch, exhibited some masculine features. She's the kind of person that probably 3 months ago would have been an opponent of the Iranian regime. And she's out in support, rallying for the Iranian regime. That's the kind of effect we've had on the Iranian people. And Trump and his advisors, they don't understand that.
How do you interpret the Trump-Putin call after the meeting with Iran's foreign minister, especially if Putin initiated it?
Yeah, it was a direct result of meeting with Arachi on Monday. And the message that was conveyed to Donald Trump is basically keep your damn hands off of Iran. If you put ground forces in, you're going to have a problem with us. That was the message, based on Yuri Ushakov gave a briefing to the press yesterday. So it was described as a friendly call, but it was a call putting Trump and company on that Russia has the full backing. They are behind Iran 100% in this. So it's one other thing for Trump to think about. And frankly, I don't think Trump even takes it seriously, or that it's going to affect his judgment. I think he's off in a completely different dimension. So, but he took the phone call. Putin delivered the message, and this is only the second time that actually Putin has initiated a phone call. So that shows, from the Russian standpoint, it was a priority, and we'll see. Right now, the entire military posture in the region, it's locked and loaded. It's just a matter of Trump saying, "Okay, go or don't go," and we'll find out. One thing that would tell us that he's going to back away is if he started withdrawing troops, but that's not what's happening. They're flowing more troops, more resources into the region. So that just tells me this is not an intimidation tactic. This is they're actually going to launch, even though the military advisors have counseled against it. Trump once again is going to ignore what the military has told him, and he's going to make matters worse.
How much is the risk of escalation tied to Netanyahu's political position? Could new attacks be used to shift momentum? And how do developments in southern Lebanon, like FPV drone use, factor into this?
Well, that was a point I was going to make, that the report yesterday is several brigades. Israel's withdrawing several brigades from southern Lebanon. So this appears to be a repeat of 2006, yep, where they tried to get to the Litani River, couldn't. Hezbollah stopped them, and then Israel basically started withdrawing because it was taking too many casualties. It has taken, I would estimate they've at least doubled, if not tripled, the casualties this time compared to 2006. So it really has become a costly affair. Now, ask yourself, where did Hezbollah get those FPV drones? They just, the busy beavers in their workshops underground making them? Or is it possible, conceivable, that Iran supplied them with the drones? But we were told, we've got rid of Bashar al-Assad. We've destroyed the ability of Iran to resupply Hezbollah. We've killed all the Hezbollah leadership. We gave them those exploding phones and pagers. Hezbollah is devastated. Yeah, now Hezbollah is kicking Israeli ass right and left, and forcing them they have been unable to achieve their military objectives other than destroying every village that's right along the border, leveling it. But that it's the Stalingrad effect. When the Germans blew up Stalingrad, they created some natural defenses for the Russian, then Soviet forces, and so the same sort of phenomenon has happened here. That they create more cover and concealment that the Hezbollah folks can use to attack Israelis. So this is Netanyahu doesn't have it. He can't point to a victory anywhere. They're getting beat up in southern Lebanon because Iran was still able over land to resupply Hezbollah and keep Hezbollah current with the latest, greatest technology, not something old and outdated. He's failed to suppress and control Gaza, and now they failed to in Iran. So he's got he's 3 times a loser, and that's going to affect the vote, I'm sure, because he may be desperate to try for another Hail Mary to knock out the Iranians, but it's not going to succeed.